Today's daf is daf Chaf Gimel, and we'll start at the top of the daf. Al gabi cheres mutter. So we were talking about lighting a fire for the purpose of creating an incense, or alternatively, in the case of a fire that's smoking up the house, extinguishing the fire in order to protect the people in the house from the impact of the smoke. And we came to the conclusion in the last sugya on Daf Chaf Beis Amid Beis that in the case where he has coals and he wants to get the wonderful smell from the fragrance of incense that he places on the coals, and when the coals will send up the fragrance of the incense, it will give an extra special smell to his fruits, and that we said was prohibited. But if instead of burning a fire over coals, he heats up an earthenware vessel, no matter how hot you make it, you will never see a flame. And therefore, this is called havara kelachar yad. It's not the normal way that you would burn something. And therefore, the malacha of kibui, the malacha of havara would not apply in a normal way in the case of a kli cheres. So heating up a kli cheres would not be a violation on a doraisa level, neither of meleches kibui nor of meleches havara. However, midrabanan it's asur, but on yontif, because of the simchas yontif, that he enhances his simcha because the fragrance of the bosem enters into his food, his peros, they allowed it. Rabba Omar, al gabi cheres nami asur. Now, Rabbah is coming with what I call a curveball, or what you might call in baseball left field. This is not something that we had on our table as far as Yontif is concerned. We had a malacha called kibui, we had a malacha called havara, and Rabbah comes up with a brand new category that is prohibited on Yontif, mishum de kol molid recha. He is creating a reach where a reach never existed before. What happens when he puts the besamim on top of the cheres absorbs the smell, the reach of the besamim. And that's something that a cheres, a piece of pottery, doesn't have on its own in nature. You've created something that didn't exist until this moment. And that's the reach of the bosem in the kli cheres. And Rabbah says that's called molid recha. And you're not allowed to create a smell where a smell didn't exist. It's too similar to a creative form of labor, like, for example, makav patich or other malachos, where you create something new. And the Gemara says that Rabbah Rav Yosef Yami Travayu schufe kasa ashiroi biomatava asu. My time of mishum de molid recha. They used to have a cup, a kos, and it was saturated with bosem, with a fragrant spice. And what they would do is they would take a garment or another type of a cloth, and they would cover that kos with a garment, with a piece of cloth. And as a result, the smell from this kos would rise and penetrate and add and enhance a fragrant smell to the beged. Says Rabbah, you're not allowed to do that on Yontif. Why? Because you're creating a new reach in the begadim, in the cloth, in the clothing, which didn't exist before. Just like in the case of a kli cheres, Rabbah prohibits taking the bosem and by process of heating it having the smell of the bosam inject itself into the klicheres, the walls of the vessel. You're creating a new smell that didn't exist. So too, in this case of a kos, which you're using to inject a smell into the begadim, you're creating a new smell. So the Gemara immediately asks, "My shna." We have a Gemara later on in Masechet Beitza called Mololo Umeriach Bo, that if you have any sort of a piece of wood, I shouldn't call it a piece of wood, I call it a twig of a tree that has a fragrant smell to it. Like, for example, you could talk about hadassim. You're allowed on Yontiv to hold on to the branch of the tree, and you can be molel. Molel means you can rub it in your hands, and by rubbing it, you generate a smell, a wonderful fragrance, which you take out of the tree, out of the branch, and you're allowed to do that on Yontif. And smell the wonderful smell of the branch of the myrtle tree. Or an alternative, kotmo, umeriachpo. You're even allowed to break off a little part of the twig, the head of the twig, and that's going to let a beautiful fragrant smell come forward. And you and I know that we have a special bracha that we recite over the smell of the samim. In fact, the Gemara tells us in Bava in Masechet Brachas that enjoying that smell is connected to the neshama itself. It's above physicality. Why is that mutter? You're creating a new reach. How is Rava going to reconcile himself with this Gemara that we're going to have about mololo umeriachbo? Hasam, that's different. Reicham via Isam. He's not creating a new reach. The reich is in the branch of the tree. He just has to rub it in such a way that now that fragrance will be accessible so we can smell it. By rubbing it, he's adding to the smell. And as we said before, to make it more accessible, it's in the air. And it's not similar to a malacha chadasha, like you created something new. But here, when you talk about, the begadim that he puts on top of the klicheres, and those begadim never had any smell at all. Or, for example, if you talk about that kos, remember we said that cup had a very intense fragrance to it, and now you put the begadim on top of the kos, that's prohibited because the begadim now receive a smell that they never had, whereas the eitz, the anaf, already always had that smell. Rava now goes back to the original issue that we had yesterday on Daf Chav Beis regarding Ishun Peros B'Yontif, Al Gabi Gachelis Nami Mutter. And Rava is of the opinion that if you want to add a certain kind of a fragrant smell to Peros, then Rava, reflecting Shmuel that we had back on Daf Chav Beis and Beis, says that there's no Iser, neither Kibui, nor Havara, nor Holodas Reach, because the Ishun is called Tzorech Ochel Nefesh, even though maybe not every single person has that special taste because of the fragrant odor of the peros. But nevertheless, most people would enjoy it, and therefore it's called Chavel Ochel Nefesh. It's something that is a Tzorech Yontiv, Fanoas Haguf, and anyone would appreciate it. Midi Dihavi Ad Bisra Agumre. And we should compare it to the case of putting meat on top of coals on Yontif in order to roast the meat. So we roast meat on hot coals. And even though when he puts the meat on top of the coals, inevitably the coals die down a little bit, and then the flame shoots up. So he's got both machabe and mavir here. And nevertheless, it's mutter. Why? Because it's something that everybody could appreciate. And so too, molid reach, when the basar, let's say, has a certain taste to it, which has a certain odor, a smell, a fragrance, and it goes into the coals, into the b'chamim, that's called molid reach, and yet it's mutter. So we see, says Rava, that we could be makil both on Ishun Peros and with regard to the case of Molid Reach. Dorash Rav Gvia mi Bei Kasil, a place called Bei Kasil. And Rav Gvia darshaned the following halacha. Apischa, where did he publicize it? On the entranceway to the Bei Reich Galusa, the Pesach of the Rosh Hagolah. Ktura b'yantif shari. You're allowed to create Ktura on Yantif. That's very exciting news. If I only knew what Keturah was. So Rav Gavia did not explain what Keturah was. And the Gemara thinks that the word Keturah here in this context of Rav Gavia's ruling is identical with the word Keturah, which is an Aramaic word that appears all over Shas, and that's called a kesher. Keturah is a knot. However, there's a pasuk in the 19th chapter of Bereshis in Parshas Vayera that mentions Kitar HaKivshan, which is the pillar of smoke that goes up from a furnace. And that's what we call the Ishun. So what was Rav Gavia allowing on Yontif? Amalei Ameimar. Ameimar turns to Rav Gavia and he says, "My Keturah, what did you mean when you were matir Keturah? If it's a kesher, if it's tying knots, so ik Keturah biyade, then Maisa Umanu, this would be prohibited on Yontif." And what they used to do is they had gloves and they used to tie knots. Why? Because there were folds in these gloves. They also wore something similar to gloves, but around the thigh, there's to cover like stockings. And in order to create either folds or pockets or so forth, they used to tie knots. And that's a Maisa Uma. That requires a professional. And any Maisa Uman is called Makabeh Patish. It's a Tikkun Kli, and it's prohibited on Yontif. Ve'ili Ashen. And if you're talking about putting the besamim on top of the coals in order to create a beautiful fragrance in the peros, then also the call kamachabet. Because when he puts the besamim on top of the gecholim, inevitably he dies down the fire, and that's called extinguishing. That's us. Amalei Ravashi. Ravashi turns to Ameimar and he says, "Li olam." I'm going to tell you what Rav Gavia was matir li ashen, and Rav Gavia holds like Rava, who in turn holds like Shmuel, and they were matir ishun eros on yontif midid havi abisra de gumrei. So now we have a whole long lineup of Amoraim that agree that Ishun Peros on Yontif is mutter. We have Shmuel, we had Rava, now we have Rav Gavia, Ika Diamri. However, there's a different Mishnah, a different transmission and a record for this halacha. Amalei Ameimar Mai Keturah, Keturah biyadei, Maisa Umanu. Ve'ili Ashen Asu Deka Molid Recha. The reason why Ameimar objected to this interpretation of Rav Gavia's ruling, as if to say that Rav Gavia was lenient with regard to placing whatever besamim he had to place on top of the gecholim, and that's what's called a Keturah shari, then he's violating the Isur of Molid Recha, which means that Ameimar accepted the sheet of Rabbah, and Molid Recha is also. Amar Rav Ashi, Anam Risa Nile. I presented this din in front of Rav Gavia, and he heard it from me. Umishmei de Gavra Rabam Rison Yila. And I said in the name of an Adam Gadol. And what was the exact precise record and transmission? Li Olam, Li Ashe, that you're allowed on Yontif to place the besamim on the coals. Midi de Havia Bisra de Gumre. Just like you're allowed to take meat and put it on top of the coals, even though immediately the first trigger reaction is that this kibui, it's going to extinguish some of the fire on the coals, but you're allowed to do that. It's considered Torah Ochel Nefesh. The Mishnah says, Osim Gedim Kulas. According to one opinion in the Mishnah, you're allowed to make this Gedim Kulas on the night of Pesach exactly identical to the way they did it when the Mikdash stood and they prepared the tzli, the roast of the Korban Pesach. And the Chachamim prohibited. Tanya, we learned in the Beitza, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi records the following story. Todos Ish Romi, there was a great Jewish scholar named Todos who came from Rome. The Gemara Shabbos has a whole discussion why his name was Todos. In any event, Hinigas B'nai Romi, he permitted his flock of people in Rome Lechol Gedima Kulas B'Leilei Psachim, which means that they would take a gedi, a small kid, right, a small goat, and they would roast it on the night of Pesach whole. They would take out the innards, put it on the side, attach it to the whole body of the goat, of the kid, and they would roast it exactly the way they did it at the time that the mikdash stood. Sholchule, the Chachamim sent a message to Todos, and they said, Il mole Todos ato. If not for the fact that we know you and we recognize you to be a great scholar, then Gozarno Olecha Nidri. We would have put you into an excommunication. Shata Machil es Bnei Yisrael Kodshim Machutz. Because we don't have a Beis HaMikdash today, and wherever we eat the meat on the night of Pesach, we're outside the Azara, and you made it seem like we're eating kodshim because you prepared the roasting of this Gedi Makulas exactly the way they prepared the roasting of the Korban Pesach. So Gemara says, kodshim salkedaitoch, you can't take this literally. It doesn't mean that they were eating kodshim bachutz. Nobody was magdish the Gedi Makulas. Ela ema, you should write it this way: Ke'ein kodshim bachutz. In other words, the spectator might begin to think that we are roasting the Korban Pesach, and it looks like they were magdishit for a Korban Pesach, and we have to worry about the fact that people are going to think that you're allowed to eat kodshim bachutz. And now we're up to the Mishnah. Shlosha dvarim, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah matir v'chachamim osrim. In the previous Mishnah, we learned about 3 kulos of Rabbi Gamliel. Now we're going to learn about 3 kulos of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah against the Chachamim. Shlosha dvarim Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah matir. I love his father's name. The Chachamim osrim. The Chachamim were machmir. Paraso Yotza Biritzua Shebein Karneha. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah allowed his cow to go out on Shabbos into a Rishus HaRabim, and it had a beautiful ribbon that was tied between its horns. And that's a real serious issue, which the Chacham objected to, because Adam mitzuva al shvisas behemto. The Torah says, L'man yanuach shorcha v'chamorecha, that on the 7th day of the week, we have to see to it that our animals are in a state of menucha. They are resting and not working. And now you tie a ribbon around the horns of the para, and you let it go out in Rishus HaRabim. That's called masa. It's carrying something. And Rabbi Elazar holds, no, that's not carrying. That's called noi. Noi means it beautifies the animal. and it's as if the animal were dressed up in something. It's like a malbush. It's not derech masa. Chacham hold it's called a masa, and it's awesome. Number two, mirakdin. Mirakdin means when you comb es habehema, because the animal might have certain filth that's attached to its body, so you comb it and clean off the outer hides of the animal. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, I have no compunctions about allowing you to do this on Yom Tov, because the animal is very uncomfortable with all this rubbish that's attached to it, so clean it off. Now, the truth is that when he uses these kinds of utensils to comb the outer skin of the animal, he inevitably makes what's called chaburos. There are going to be little breakages, breaks in the skin, wounds, and that's a tolda of meleches shochet. But nevertheless, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was matir. The Gemara is going to try to figure out why. Third, you're allowed to use the mills in order to do shchika, which means to crush the natural spices and make them into smaller, like a powder that you can use in cooking. And Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah allowed this, even though this is a violation of meleches tchina, of grinding. But nevertheless, he held on Yom Tov, it's tzarich ochel nefesh, for eating purposes, and therefore it's allowed. The Chacham say, no, we're not going to allow you to use this special kli, this mill that's made and designated for crushing, because that's too similar to what we do during the week, and that's going to be a zilzal in Yom Tov, and therefore we're going to only allow to use a pestle, I think it's called in English. I forget what it's called. Anyway, where they have this bowl and you sort of crush it around, and it's made of stone. That's what we're going to allow. Rabbi Yehuda Omer ein mekardin esabei b'Yom Tov. He says that if you use a comb that's made of metal on Yom Tov, it has very thin, what are they called? Shinayim, teeth, I guess you'd call it. I don't know if there's another word in English. And there's thin teeth. Mipnei shoseh chabura. And Rabbi Yehuda is going to accept the shita of the Chachamim against Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, who accept the shita of the Chachamim, who prohibit any kind of combing of the outer skin of the animal that will create chabura because of meleches shochet. Aval mekartzefin. If you have a different kind of a vessel, which is called a magredes, and there it's made of wood rather than metal, and its teeth are very thick, he will not make a chabura, and therefore it's mutah. Chachamim ein makardin the af lo mekartzefin. We're not even going to allow you to comb the back of the animal with a magredes, because if we allow you to use this kli, which doesn't make a chabur, you'll mistakenly use the other kli, which is made of metal and has very thin teeth, and inevitably you will violate meleches shchita by making a chabur. So the Gemara immediately asks, "L'meimra Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah chada para havile." How could it be that our Mishnah describes paraso yotza b'rtzua shebein karnei? Paraso, his para, as if to say that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was the proud owner of one cow. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was the proud owner of thousands of cows, thousands. And how do we know this? From a Rav, Yamri over Rav Yehuda Rav, Tleisar Alfei Egle. We're talking about 13,000 calves. Havi Maaser, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, that was just his Maaser, his 10%. may edre from his flock, kol shata v'shata on an annual basis. So for sure, you can't talk about one para of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Tana, the Gemara answers based on a brisa, lo shalo haisa. The para that was mentioned as the para of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was really not Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's para. El shel shchento haisa. It was his neighbor. She was probably an almana, and Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah was the next door neighbor. He saw how she would allow the para to go out into Rishus HaRabim on Shabbos when the para had this ribbon, this ritzua, the strap, tied down to its horns. Mitoch Shalom Micha. Elazar ben Azariah should have told her straight away that she's not allowed to do this. She is violating the mitzvah of Shvisas Behemto. Mitoch Shalom Micha ba nikreis al shmo. It's as if he himself was the owner of this cow and it was flocking and roaming through the public domain with a strap tied to its horns. Why? Because we have a moral principle in halacha that kol misha efshalo limkos b'acherim ha'ovrim avera v'eino moche b'hen hareu nenash al avera zu. This is a Gemara Masechet Shabbos on Daf Nun Daled Amud Beis. We are held personally liable and responsible for situations that we could have prevented by making a macha, by protesting. The Mishnah says, Maraktin es a behema biyantif, ton rabbanan esu kedur v'esu kirtz. What's the difference between the two? And we were makil on kerud, according to Rabbi Yehuda. Is kerud is what's called ktanim. Ktanim means that the teeth are very thin, and very often what happens is, no, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. Kerud is the case that's asur. Kirtzuf is the case that's mutar. I'm sorry, I made that mistake. So what's the difference between kirtzuf, which is mutar, and kerud, which is asur? Kerud is asur because ktanim, it has very thin teeth, and those teeth sink into the flesh of the animal, the osim chabura, and they create wounds. But kirtzuf, that's a magredes, that's a comb that's made of wood and has very thick teeth, gdolim, v'ein osim chabura, and they don't make chabura. V'sholosh machlokos b'dov. We have three different opinions in this context. We start with Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, then we go to the Chachamim, and then finally Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda Sava Davar Shenim Miskavein Asur. Rabbi Yehuda is going to prohibit a Megared as a behema because possibly you might make a chabura, even though you're not interested in the least bit in creating a chabura, and therefore you're not Miskavein. But nevertheless, a Davar Shenim Miskavein is Asur. And miu kerud ktanim osim chabura. In other words, Rabbi Yehuda would only prohibit using a kerud, because in the case of a kerud, since it has these small teeth that dig into the flesh of the animal, it creates wounds. Kirtzuf, on the other hand, gedolim, they have wider teeth. V'ein osim chabura. V'lo gazrinon. And therefore, there's no gzeira. No, we don't say kirtzuf atu kerud, that if we allow him to do kirtzuf, he's going to mistakenly confuse it with kerud and use that kind of metal comb that has very thin teeth. For Rabbanan Savri, Nami Rabbi Yehuda, Davar Shenim Miskavein also, they agree that kirud is asur me'ikar din because of Davar Shenim Miskavein. Gazrina and kirtzuf atu kerud. If we allow him to do kirtzuf, he might come to do Kerud. Rabbi Lozman Azariah, Savralok Rabbi Shimon, he never accepted this opinion of Dover Shenim Miskamin Asur. He holds like Rabbi Shimon, Ti Omar Dover Shenim Miskamin Mutar, Ben Kerud, Ben Kirtzuf Shari. And this is called a Dover Shenim Miskamin because he has no intention to create Chabura. And it's not a psikresha. We don't know for sure that he's going to create Chabura. There's so many different variables that play a role that kick in, how hard he does it, how fast he does it, how tough is the skin of the animal. There's no way of predicting 100% that certainly he's going to create a Chabura. And therefore, it's a Dover Shenim Miskamin, which is mutter, like the case of Reb Shimon. In the Gemara on Shabbos, the Gemara says that Gorer, Adam Mita Kisei V'Safsol, you're allowed to drag, according to Reb Shimon, a heavy bench through Rishus HaRabim, and it doesn't have to be Rishus HaRabim, but anyway, and even though he's creating furrows, which is Meleches Choresh, but it's a Dover Shenim Miskamin. Amar Rav Nachman Omer Shmuel v'Amri Lei Amar Rav Nachman L'Chudei. Rav Nachman said it himself. Halacha Rav Shimon. We paskin like Rav Shimon that Gorer Adam Mita Kisei V'Safsol Gabi Ofar Afal Pisha Osech Haritzim B'Karka, which is told the Meleches Choresh because the Dover Shenim Miskamin. And what gives me that extra strength and what we call places, the gumption to paskin L'Kula like Rav Shimon, which has tremendous repercussions. Sharei Rabbi Lozman Azariah Modala. Because Rabbi Lozman Azariah also agrees in Almich, in the case of Kirud, that it's a Dover Shenim Miskamin Lassos Chabura, and therefore it's mutter. Amalei Rav Nachman v'Lema Mar Halochik Rabbi Yehuda Sharei Chachamim Modim Lo. Why is he building so much on Rabbi Lozman Azariah when the Chacham rejected Rabbi Lozman Azariah? They held that Kirud is Asur. Amalei, so Rav Nachman responds to Rava, and not Rav Shimon's spirit. In truth, I accept the logic of Rav Shimon because I find his logic compelling. And I got a little bit extra, extra strength and extra gumption. Sharei Rabbi Lozman Azariah Modelo. So Rabbi Lozman Azariah agrees that we pass like Rav Shimon with regard to a davar she'eno miskaven is mutar.